Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Chats with Yvonne. In this segment, we are talking about, of course, public speaking, but we're going to focus on the intersections of public speaking, imposter syndrome, and self care. You may be asking yourself, what the heck, how the heck are those things all related? But they truly are. And today's guest will help us dive into that conversation a little bit more. I'll pass it over to them to introduce themselves. Her name is Mattia. Thank you so much for being on Chats with Yvonne. How are you?
I'm doing very well today. This is definitely new to me because this is like my first podcast. This is talking with someone who's a public speaking expert. So it's definitely an honor to be here with you.
No, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited that this is your first one ever. I have some kind of kudo points, I guess, for that. Not kudo, but I can take pride in that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'd love for people to get to know you a little bit. Let us know what you do, who you are. Just give us a little bit of insight into who you are and what you do.
So recently, I just graduated from NYU with my master's in social work, which was like really huge for me. And before and like during that whole time, I was also part of an adaptive leadership fellowship through NYU, which was huge for me and just pushing myself out of my boundaries and, really pushed me to say, like, take up space and really start talking more and doing more activism and also pushing me towards my goal, which is definitely public speaking and to start doing that more.
Mm-hmm.
And out and having more of an influence. I'm sorry, my cat is bothering me.
No worries.
Just putting myself out there and being more of that, influence that I want to see out in the world. And also, I spent this whole pandemic working with kids at a Head Start program and conducting cognitive behavioral therapy, doing child-centered play therapy and meditation. And that like completely opened my eyes to, imposter syndrome, where it comes from, and why nurturing children and their emotional intelligence, especially during that 3 to 5 years, is so important, because I was able to see how just simple communication and letting them speak about their emotions was really key to having kids have more confidence in themselves, having kids speak out more, instead of children being silent
Right.
and not feeling heard.
I love that you're talking about that because you're sort of starting to dive into the intersections of all of self-care and imposter syndrome and public speaking. One of the things that I always talk about is your confidence doesn't just, no one just wakes up confident all the time. It's a cycle. Some days we feel a little bit more sure of ourselves than other days, but public speaking, I find that is one of the tools of communication that it's actually the tool for gaining confidence, right? It's not that, oh, before I start doing public speaking, before I do any of that, I need to be confident. I need to go find confidence somewhere, right? It's almost like sometimes we just have to jump into it because from a young age, we don't have people like you that are nurturing our emotional intelligence, as you said, right? Which I love. I love that, right? Because I think that's one of the skills that we don't think about as being really important to what we do. So I'd love to dive into that part of what you said a little bit more. And how do we nurture our emotional intelligence, right? Like you mentioned you worked with children. How can we do that, continue to do that and practice that as adults? And can you define emotional intelligence for us if there's folks that aren't
Yeah.
sure what that is?
It's like emotional intelligence is having that self-awareness. And it's like, I'm trying to explain it. It's like, it's also self-awareness, but it's also realizing, for example, you have a friend and you're always there for them, and you start having that self-awareness. Like, I'm always this emotional, support for this person, but they are not receptive to me. They are not emotionally available to me. And, if you don't understand your emotions and you also don't have the capacity to have that empathy for someone else, then you don't have that emotional intelligent capability yet. But everyone can have emotional intelligence. It just takes time to really be vulnerable. It really starts with being vulnerable with yourself.
Right. Right. And how can we nurture that part of ourselves? You did talk a little bit about self-care, and is that one of the ways that we can do that? Or what other ways can we, in the same ways that we grow our skill set in writing or grow our skill set in some other thing, how can we grow our skill set in being self-aware, if at all?
It's like with me, it was just training.
Mhm.
But I think some of us already have that innate because some of us grew up in like bad childhoods, right? Or we had trauma, and trauma opened you up to having emotional intelligence automatically because
Mhm.
that's a trauma response to always be aware of why is this person acting this way? I need to adjust the way I talk, the way I think to this person, or my mom's mad because of this. You automatically will know that because it's almost a trauma response.
Wow, that's so interesting. Once I had someone say to me, "Wow, Yvonne, your emotional intelligence is just high up there for your age," right? And I was like, "Huh." I didn't know if that was a good thing. At the time, I was like, cool, that's awesome. That's great." And now that you're saying this, I was like, damn, maybe I'm just, there's like something else there. And that's why that happens. So when you nurture that emotional intelligence with the kids that you've worked with, how is it, what's the opposite of nurturing that without it being stemming from trauma, right? Like, if we're talking about, we're doing this so that the result is, you're better communicators, you're more confident. How do you do that with the children?
Well, normally when I would start out a session, I would say, "How are you feeling?" And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they say happy, or sometimes they say sad, they say scared, or sometimes they say angry, and we go deeper into that. And I'm like, okay, so point. We have our little feelings board, and I'm like, okay, so point to the face, point to how you're feeling, and then tell me why. And their reasons, even though it's small, it means a lot to them,
Mm-hmm.
and giving them that space to talk about their family, to talk about their mom, their dad, or their older sibling who, was picking on them. That is where it starts, having that communication. If they're mad about their ice cream, like let them have that time
Right.
to,
Right.
because at the end of the day, it means a lot to them.
Right. Right. And it's about finding out and identifying what means a lot to us, right? Because we all have those different things. And so what I want to get into is your public speaking, kind of how that's shown up for you, or how you have worked through it, and a little bit of your journey. What I try to do on Chats with Yvonne is to just humanize the public speaking experience. And so that means going through the motions. Like, we all get really afraid sometimes of it, where some days we're a little bit less confident. So what has your public speaking journey been like?
Honestly, a lot of it has been on a small scale, more of smaller activism, doing group work where I work with like a group of 10 people or more. And we go through, like, I've done meditation activities, like mandala activities. And a lot of it is talking with them, explaining what mandala is, explaining the purpose of the activity. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my public speaking has been more on a smaller scale. It has not been a huge conference or a social work conference, but that is definitely the goal, to start talking at social work conferences. And that's also how you make those big connections, networking, and also breaking those boundaries, not being so scared to put yourself out there. It's really like nerve wracking.
Oh yeah, yeah. And even in those small scale, as you're calling them, public speaking events that you've held, what have you found are the most effective ways of communicate? Every depending on our audience, things will change, right? But for you in those specific moments, what has been really effective, both for you as a communicator and someone else on the receiving end, but also just your preparation for it? Like, what do you do that sets you up for a successful session with folks?
Definitely, like if I have a file, I'll go through the file. Or if it's going to be for a community, I'm going to make sure to do some research on this community,
Mhm.
maybe the challenges that are going on in this community, the ethnicities, the races. Like, I would go through all information that I would need. Also, like the age range is very important, because depending on who you're talking to, you're going to change the way you speak. You know,
Yeah.
I'm talking to someone who's, for example, like 60 to 70, I'm going to be more reserved with the way I speak. I'm not going to, or maybe I'm going to change my jokes to meet like that specific clientele, or certain references I'm going to make to that specific generation because they're going to be able to relate to me.
Yes, I like that. And I think that that's universal, right? It's almost like code switching with depending on who you're talking to. And one of the things that I often get asked about is, well, if I have to code switch, does that mean I'm a different person each time? Does that mean I'm not being my authentic self if I'm, talking to this person one way versus talking to this person the other way? And there are some instances where you're like, ooh, that I was just being I was using my phone voice, right? And like that, but that has a purpose. And the purpose is I want to get great customer service from the rep or whatever it is, right? So I'm going to change my voice a little bit. So how have you found ways to remain authentic to who you are throughout all of your sessions and throughout talking to different kinds of people?
I think I'm just remaining like authentic, just being honest, always being transparent, and, don't lie, don't be fake, because the audience is going to know.
Yeah.
And that whole energy is going to stay there in that room.
Yep.
I've felt it before, and it's awkward.
No, that's so true. And the same goes for when you try to memorize something, right? You're like, I need to memorize this. I can't deviate away from this script. And that makes you a little bit less yourself because you're not in the moment, and so you mess up. And there's a loss of connection there with the audience, which is what you don't want. The entire point of public speaking or, sharing something, whether it's some information, whether it's a skill set, whether it's your story, the point is to connect with people and to have them actually care about what you're saying. So people will care when you are who you are, right? So
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing that up. And one of the other questions that I wanted to touch into is you mentioned imposter syndrome, right? And I'd like to hear from you where do you, from your perspective, where does imposter syndrome show up, whether it's with the kids you're working or with yourself when you are doing public speaking, and how do you try to combat that?
I think imposter syndrome has come up for me because it's like I've always been doing the work. I've been on this journey of social work. I've worked hard to get here, and still I feel like I'm not doing enough, but I have been doing enough. This pandemic has put me and many others through a lot. So
Yeah.
it's like, why am I feeling this way? And I feel like it definitely comes from childhood, and also not having enough of that support. Your support system is the most important thing. So if you don't have that, it's going to be harder for you on that journey to get out of feeling imposter syndrome. And I feel like it's always going to be a battle. Doesn't matter how much money you have, how successful you are. If you're not working on your inner self, that imposter syndrome is always going to be there.
And isn't that so wild that no matter how many accomplishments you have and how many things you actually have been doing, not that you need to do any of them or have all of these accomplishments to just be enough, right? But isn't it crazy that we have all of these things or we do all of these things? I'm like, okay, I did everything I was supposed to do. I went to the college, I got the certification, I know how to speak a new language now. I can, all these successes as folks would see them, and we still doubt ourselves when it's time to talk about the things that we know or to show up as the professionals or the experts that we are. And that in it itself we could probably talk about for days, because I think that one of the ways also that we talk about imposter syndrome is through experiences, right? And so we learn a little bit more about it when we're able to talk about, hey, you experienced it this way, I experienced it this way, these are the common themes. How do we get away from that? And do you think that imposter syndrome is something that we can ever really get away from?
I don't know. I think it starts like if we start really raising our kids to talk more, to be more outgoing, to feel that they can do whatever they want, then maybe but I think it starts in the childhood. We have to start focusing. Like, I know people preach the kids. No, I'm realizing now that it is about the kids,
Yeah. Yeah.
we keep, you know what I mean? Children are a burden in a sense, even though they are a miracle, they are a burden. And a lot of people have kids at a time where they are not mentally, emotionally, financially prepared. And that's why children continue to fall in the cracks, really.
Mm. And so I'd love to end our conversation just on letting us know how what can we, because we met over Instagram, right? And so this is the first
Yeah.
time that we're meeting, which one I think is awesome. Like I've met so many people through social media and through interaction in this way. And so you and I are communicating in this way and, having these conversations, and you're opening up to me, which I appreciate. You didn't have to, but you do. You're sharing with us a little bit about you, and so I appreciate that. What can we expect from you, or what do you want to leave our audience with today about this conversation, having to do with the intersections of imposter syndrome, public speaking, self-care? What do you want to leave our audience with today? No
Definitely.
pressure.
Yeah, like the pressure. Definitely just like we need to, all of us, including myself, because I'm always going to be in therapy because that's a part of my profession. Continue to work on yourself, whether that's with a therapist or not, because everybody's choices are going to be different. But just work on yourself. Think about yourself. What do you want? What does good mental health look like for you? Who or what do you have to cut out of your life in order to feel more at peace within yourself? Because if you're into adulthood and you start realizing I have imposter syndrome, how are you going to take care of yourself in order to start combating that, so you can start feeling like I am worthy, I am worth all of the things I have attained, and I'm going to continue to keep getting those things even with imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is not going to stop me, and it takes a while to get there. It really does.
And that, I think, is the perfect way to end our segment. What you just said is imposter syndrome takes a while to completely go away. The nerves, the fear, the lack of confidence that we may feel leading up to a public speaking engagement, or even just a communication, a simple one-on-one interaction, those things may never fully go away because they're part of kind of who we are in our experiences. But I appreciate you calling that out. And I think that it's important for us to become more self-aware, so that when we're called upon to share our voices, to be the activists in our communities, we can show up as our community needs us to. So with that, Mattia, thank you so much for being on Chats with Yvonne. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and this platform.
Thank you, everybody.